The newspaper man. Joseph sat out the front of the pub. Doing what he always did. Relying on the kindness of the drunkards to spare some change. Maybe he would eat today. Maybe tomorrow his coat would have more than newspapers for lining. It was torture waiting outside. From the doorway he could feel the heat seeping out of the doorway. He could hear the cheery yells and yahoos from the patrons inside. But most of all he could smell the food. Simple things to keep the drunkards satiated. Hot dogs. Feed shrimp and steak to name a few. Joseph couldn't remember the last time he'd had any of these foods. He was too ashamed to ever venture in tonight. The dim lighting in the pub only deformed his already weathered features. Distorting them and disfiguring them under the light. Meshing his physical scars with the grotesque emotional scars he keeps to himself. He could hear loud music and shouting from a few blocks away. The town was holding a festival in honor of their beloved Tigers, which from what Joseph could gather from inebriated strangers passing his alley was the local sporting team. Joseph felt his heart sink as it once again dawned on him that he was a social outcast. Who would ever want to befriend him? His shoulders dropped and his head hung low. He slumped back to his alley. It was nothing special. Secluded behind some dumpsters was his pride and joy in old, abandoned couch. More importantly, a bottle of rum that he hid in between the cushions. He drank until his head was spinning. He rummaged through the couch cushions again until he found his old Swiss Army knife. He pocketed it. Once he was a Boy Scout. He'd always learned to keep prepared. He walked back around the corner to the pub with his bottle of rum and waited. He was determined to eat tonight. A few men staggered out of the pub covered in what Joseph could only assume were team colors. They stopped to give him a few dollars and then were on their way. The next person to walk out was a woman. She was alone and in teats. Joseph felt bad and asked her what was wrong. She dropped herself next to Joseph and began to tell him about how her boyfriend had broken up with her. Joseph smiled. "I wish my biggest problem was a fella." The woman began to panic. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, here I am just letting out all my problems to you." She was slurring after obviously drinking away her sorrows. The biggest giveaway was that she was venting to a man wearing no shoes and a jacket lined with newspaper. "It's okay," Joseph said, propping himself against the wall and standing up before offering the woman his hand to help her up. She accepted and stood up. Like a viper, Joseph struck. He hit her in the head with his now empty rum bottle. It shattered due to force. The woman dropped back to the ground and Joseph dragged her into his alley. He lay her gently on his couch. She was out cold. Using his Swiss Army knife, he located the blade tool and used it to cut off her clothes. He felt her soft skin under his hands. He took off his coat and turned it inside out. He didn't want it to get messy. From behind the couch he produced an axe. Starting with her pretty head, he began to dismember his still-breathing beauty. He loved the feeling of only getting the blade halfway through a limb and the resistance the blade met when the crimson wound would try and keep the axe in. He knew he should have sharpened the blade, but the blunt and dull tip added more fun. He wished the alley was more enclosed. He could have started at her legs and then heard her scream and watch her naked body struggle under the moonlight. Her body was now in 6 pieces. 5. Once the head was in the dumpster. He produced 2 garbage bags. One for the body and one for her limbs. He walked around the corner and up to his apartment. He hung his newspaper-lined coat up beside his suit jacket. Maybe he would wear that tomorrow after he replaced the newspaper in his coat and went to collect some change at the pub. Not that he needed it. It was just a fun thing to do. He stored his new food in his freezer. He would eat tonight. The last child he had lasted him 9 days. This bitch should last him a fortnight. Joseph couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten fried shrimp steak or hot dogs. But he could remember the last time he'd bitten into a nice, own-baked piece of flesh. Maybe next time he'll pretend to be a patron. Once he'd showered, of course. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe.